Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Smith. I'm the Group Managing Director of People2People in Australia and Frog Recruitment in New Zealand. It's Thursday afternoon, and once again, we are hosting a webinar series, and this is the third in our leadership series. And today we've got a fabulous guest who will be speaking about positive change in leadership, a four-step model for today's leader. So it's actually a beautiful day here in Sydney, and it is May 28th. It's quite an auspicious day, I suppose you could say, because rugby league is starting again in Sydney tonight. So things are already changing. So it's a fantastic day. I'm looking forward to the game this evening. So now let's go to our speaker. So a sought-after program facilitator, keynote speaker and mentor, Jane Davis is the director of the Flourishing Institute. She has spent almost 30 years of working in organisational psychology, and her approach is a direct result of her psychology education, business background, and practical results-orientated view of the world. Jane's flagship program, Optimise Your Potential, helps people build psychological strength to be flexible, positive, and resilient in order to flourish in their lives and communities. Jane has worked in-house and as a consultant to many of New Zealand's leading corporate organisations. She has partnered with People2People's sister company in New Zealand, Frog Recruitment, and People2People on several occasions, and we are delighted to have the opportunity to hear from her again today. Welcome, Jane, to the People2People webinar series. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to work with you this afternoon. Thanks to People2People and Frog Recruitment in New Zealand. Like Mark said, I've had a long association with Frog, and I'm really excited to be able to present this for you today. Thank you so much for all those involved in organising this. I know it takes a lot. So Remy and Renee and Jane and Ben and Mark, of course, appreciate all the time and effort that's gone into this today. So as we get into this, a little bit of admin first, I guess. It's not going to be just about me talking, and I've let Mark know that every now and again I'm going to be asking him some questions. And so we've had a bit of a chat about that. So he's been slightly primed, but not totally. And then we're going to be using the chat function as well. So I will ask you some questions. So it's quite important that you try and pay attention as much as you can. And the more that you involve yourself in this and participate, the better it will be for everybody. I do have some slides I'm going to share with you. We had a few technical issues when we were setting this up in terms of slide sharing. And so every now and again, I'm going to be asking Remy to change the slides. So just bear with us as we do that. In terms of timing, I think it's probably going to take about 45 minutes. And after that time, I'm going to open it up to you. You can submit your questions, and hopefully we'll have time to get through them. We'll see how we go. So Remy, I'm just going to get you to share my screen. Thank you. Because what I'd like to do is to be able to give you a bit of a structure for today. And can we have the next slide? Right. So what I'd like to start with is to share with you what I'm seeing and hearing around the broad context in terms of mental well-being and around the impact of the uncertainty that we are all experiencing at the moment. So that's the context piece. And then I'll come on to positive leadership, and I'm going to share a model of positive leadership with you. There are 4 aspects to that model, and I'll take you through each of those, and I'll share some of the theory. But more importantly, and this is the most important part of today, I'm going to share with you the practical application of it. So things that you can do every day that we know make a difference. So I've been teaching positive leadership since 2011, and I've worked with many people in all different organisations. And I guess I've learned a lot about what positive leadership's about and how to apply it and what works. So that's the most interesting bit. What actually makes the biggest difference? So I'm going to share some of that insight with you, while also thinking about, well, right now the context is a little bit different. So we need to try and think about what works in this context. So when we come to that part, this is where I'm going to ask you to participate. Because you'll already be doing a whole lot of stuff that works. And I'm really keen and curious to hear from you by using the chat function some ideas about what is working well in the 4 areas of positive leadership that I'm going to be talking about. And the really cool thing about that, it's kind of like live crowdsourcing really, is by the end of this, we're going to have accumulated, hopefully, hundreds of different ideas about what you could try when you get back to the workplace. And this is going to be recorded. So at any stage, if you want to go back and have a look at what we talked about or get some ideas from other people, it's all going to be there for you. So it's going to be a really cool resource. So I think that, I've said at the end there's going to be, hopefully be a bit of time for questions and answers. So that's the structure for today. Remy, can I get you? There we go. All right. So here's something for you to do. Using the chat button, what percentage of New Zealanders will experience a diagnosable mental health issue by middle age? So middle age is actually age 38. And diagnosable means it doesn't necessarily have to be diagnosed. And when you think about mental health issue, I want you to think really broadly. It could be anything from anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder. There are many things it could be. So if you can use the chat button, and we're starting to see a few come in now, which is great. And I'm going to ask Mark the question about what he thinks the answer to this one is going to be. So as people are filling in.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. The first thing I would say, though, Jane, is that I am turning 50 next Monday. So 38 as a middle age, I'm feeling a little bit disturbed by that. I know we've done some work in the past with Are You OK and the like. So I've seen a few statistics which were quite shocking in terms of those who have depression and some statistics here in Australia around that. But I'm going to take a guess and say somewhere around that sort of 40% sort of mark.
Okay. Well, I'm seeing over on the chat, it ranges from around 30 right through to about 75 is probably the high. Oh, is it 75? It's the highest? Not sure. So there's kind of the full range there. And for the Australians that are listening, I'll share not some research about Australia, but you'll come into it in a minute. So if you just bear with me. So, well, actually, the answer is 83.
Wow.
83%. So it is, how do we know that? So that statistic comes from the Dunedin Health Study. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's just the most extraordinary study. It's internationally renowned, and it started way back in about 1970, and it's got just over 1,000 people in it. And they took this whole group of people in Dunedin from birth, and they bring them back together every few years, and they measure everything, all their physical stuff, all their mental stuff. And this is one of the questions that they've had a look at, and they've found actually of this group, 83% will experience a diagnosable mental health issue by age 38. So, it's the prevalence of mental illness is far greater than what is commonly thought. And then they said, well, is this just Dunedin? Is there something wrong with Dunedin? But actually, no. There's a similar study in Christchurch, exactly the same result. And then they've looked globally, so internationally, and it includes Australia, and exactly the same result. So, it's a lot of people. So you've got to look at that group. So we're talking, often people say, well, it's 1 in 5. Well, actually, no, it's probably 4 in 5. So the majority, will experience some sort of issue. And sometimes, actually, when you look at the research itself, it's more than one issue as well. There's multiple issues. So you've got to say there's the group we should be looking at is the 17% who have managed to escape it. So what's special about that group? How have they thrived? How have they managed to avoid what is kind of normal for everybody else? So they're an extraordinary group, actually. And so when they've asked the question, well, what is it that's special about that group? And what we know is they've got no family history of mental illness. And everything that I talk about today, you've got to remember it's actually contagious. We infect each other with our mood. It's called emotional contagion. So if you do suffer from mental illness, often that can be passed on to others. Secondly, that group experience far more positive emotions than negative emotions, which I'll touch on later on. So let's take this a little bit further and think about the current context. So Remy, if you can just turn to the next slide, that would be really helpful for me. Thank you. So this is some information that's come out of Harvard Business Review just in the last month, and where they had a global study, and they looked at almost 3,000 employees internationally, 10 industries during March and April, just been. And here's what they've found, and you can read those for yourself, but it's saying that people are feeling a lot more anxiety, stress, they're quite exhausted, socially isolated. And so I've got a poll for you. I wonder, Remy, if you can put the poll up for people to answer. It's about what you think about this, whether you would agree with it or not.
It has just been published, so you can, if you want to find it, you can either find it at the bottom of your of the page or on the right sidebar, and you can pick the answer you think is the right answer.
Right, thanks, Remy. So Remy, once that comes in, are you able to let me know and you can tell me what the figures are? Would that be okay?
Sure. We're just gonna wait for a few seconds.
Yep. And what about Mark, are you able to talk about what you're noticing in the workplace in terms of these areas and current mental well-being?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time, obviously, at the moment. We ran a little bit of a survey ourselves on what's been the effect. And it's interesting, about 92% of companies said that they had sent people working from home, and it's that whole working from home piece which I think is really, and look, everybody's talked about it quite a lot, but I think it's actually affected people's experience. What I've noticed, and just taking it really down to a people-to-people, and in my role as a manager, is that it seems that people are looking to want to communicate more frequently. So I've noticed that I'm speaking to many of my managers and to the staff at people-to-people on a much more frequent basis. It's also almost like a counterintuitive too. People are looking for more structure in their day, so they're working from home. So we're finding that we've got meetings in the morning where people are setting their objectives, and then meetings in the afternoon where people are reporting back on how they've achieved those objectives. So it's a little bit like they want that structure in the day, but then they have a lot more autonomy during the day as well to actually achieve those objectives. Yeah, I thought that's really my experience at the moment, anyway.
All right. So have we got any polls?
Yes. So the majority think that it's about right. So 67% think it's about right, and then the rest, like 15%, think it's too high, and 18% thinks it's too low.
Interesting. So probably fairly similar in terms of what people are noticing at the moment. Okay. So, Remy, can you just turn to the next slide, please? Here we go. Effective uncertainty. All right. So, Mark was just talking about, people are asking for kind of more direction and wanting more communication. And I wonder if this slide talks about the reason for that. Our brains, actually, we can often handle change quite well, but where we really struggle, and particularly our brains really struggle, is with uncertainty. And right now we're in this situation, we've got uncertainty, there's a lot of ambiguity, unpredictability, there's so little control and a lot of novelty. So novelty meaning we haven't had this experience before. We've got no experience to really fall back on to guide us through this. And all of these are very, very challenging for our brains. And if we look at the impact on well-being, and I don't know if this is true for you, but this is what I'm seeing and certainly noticing in myself from time to time, a heightened threat response. So if you think about the brain, when there's a threat out there, it certainly captures our attention, and it fires up our stressy branch of our nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system. And when that happens, you get a whole lot of physical symptoms, often shortness of breath and tight muscles, and but also the other things that happen are your perspective really narrows, and it's really hard to make connections between things, to see the bigger picture, and also hard to access the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain. So, and you're probably not going to be very imaginative or creative when you're in that, when you have that kind of threat response turned on. So a lot of people are operating like that, and especially if they already had a high level of anxiety to start with. For some people, that's leading to quite a lot of rigidity and quite muddled and confused from time to time. They just can't think clearly. They have difficulty planning ahead, especially because it's just so uncertain. We have no idea what's going to happen next. A lot of people are experiencing worry and concern, and I've been working with an organisation over the last month, and I've talked to 80 of their people in different groups, and one of the things that has come through very strongly is around a lot of worry about families, particularly family overseas, and what might happen, and about what is going to happen to their jobs. And so people's brains are quite in that kind of worrying or ruminative state from time to time. Also, kind of interpersonally, sometimes there's a lack of tolerance or empathy for others, and they can be a bit short or irritable. And finally, there's a lot of talk about people being quite tired, and sometimes people are exhausted, and a lot of that seems to be down to what we call decision fatigue, because we've got so many little decisions to make that previously we didn't even have to think about. So even a trip to the supermarket or something like that has now become quite complicated, and we have to plan for it. So it's taking up a lot of kind of space, if you like, or capacity that we had before. So that's one group. So some people certainly aren't coping very well, but there's a kind of a group in the middle who are coping pretty well despite struggle. And then there's another group who are thriving. Oh, you've flicked ahead, Remy. There's another group that are thriving, and these are people who have just have embraced this, and they're going, bring it on. This is the best thing that ever happened. And they've been at their creative best, and they're thinking about the future and what could be and the possibilities that have opened up. So in the workforce, as leaders, you're dealing with that kind of full spectrum of people, from those who are really struggling to those who are coping well despite struggle, to those who are just like, bring it on, this is fantastic. So that's what you've got to deal with. So keeping that in mind, now we're going to talk about positive leadership. But before I get to that, here's the critical focus right now, because a lot of people are just in survival mode. Okay, so that threat response is turned on. I've talked about the impact of that. So the leader's job now is to help these people find a way to calm themselves down, get out of that threat state, because that's not particularly helpful from a health and well-being point of view or a performance point of view, and into safe mode. So the whole system is calm, they're flexible and open, they can think clearly again, they can make connections between things, they can hear, kind of relate to the vision for the future. So how are you going to help people move out of the survival mode and into safe mode? And I guess that's where I wondered, Mark, if you would like to have you got any thoughts about, well, where would you start if you're going to help people move into safe mode in the workplace? What would you do? Have you got an idea?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you said to me prior was that, what am I doing to, you sort of put me on the spot a little bit and said, what are you doing to foster a positive climate, Mark? And I went, oh my God, so I had a bit of a think about it. And one of the things that sort of popped into to top of mind was in many environments, the reinforcement that you get, or the measurement, is often financial, and so, or based on activity, etc. And it got to me thinking to an initiative that we put in last year, actually, which is around our values and people nominating their fellow consultants or the team members based on our values. At P2P, it's strength, teamwork, respect, integrity, drive, and enterprise. And what people do is we encourage people to nominate their colleague when they display our values, and then we celebrate that at the end of the month. So tomorrow night, is our end of meeting, and yeah, so we have a bit of a conversation there about it. And then at the end of the year, we have a big awards thing where people celebrate the value. So in answer to your question, I think what we're doing is asking people to celebrate each other, but in a way around people's values rather than financial activity.
And it's kind of, the concept of catching people doing things right.
Yeah.
Well, highlighting that and celebrating that, which is fantastic. So you've got a double whammy. You've got the NRL tonight, and you've got the celebration.
I've got the Stride nominations tomorrow. That's right. Exactly.
It's a good
Hopefully
week.
the Warriors don't win. Yeah. Sorry, we digress.
All right. So where might you start? This is where we turn to positive leadership, because I think this model is a really useful one. So Remy, would you like to turn to the next slide for me, please? Awesome. So here's the definition. You can read it for yourselves. I'll give you a moment to read it. I think there are two things that are important here. The implementation of multiple positive practices, not just one. You need to be working in multiple areas at the same time. And the second part of it is to produce extraordinarily high performance. We're not just talking about ordinary, we're talking about extraordinarily high. Now, this model comes from Professor Kim Cameron. He's a professor of leadership at the University of Michigan. He's probably been working in this area for at least 15 years. He's probably, I would say, the world's leading researcher. And a lot of his work is around the impact of applying positive leadership in the workplace and the impact on the bottom line. And so if you want to know, if you want to read any of his work, it's all publicly available, and you can have a look at the business impact of applying this approach. And for me personally, I have seen the real business impact of it. I worked very closely with a store manager many years ago and helped her put in place a whole lot of positive leadership practices that I'm going to tell you about shortly. And we were able to look at her store results before that started. And as she got started implementing a lot of these things, we were able to track over time what happened. And she actually turned her whole store around. Interestingly, the things that were impacted the quickest were actually the financial performance and also a reduction in injuries. So health and safety was impacted really positively. So I've seen the real business impact, which is really exciting. So that's the definition of it. And there are four, Remy, if you just turn to the next slide, there are 4 areas or principles, it doesn't really matter what you call them. I'll just call them areas. So 4 areas that a leader needs to focus on and be working in each of these at the same time. So you can see them here: positive climate, positive comms, positive relationships, and positive meaning. So the best leaders right now are the ones who are going to be doing 2 things to help people cope with the uncertainty and the anxiety and everything else that is happening. So here are the 2 things that are most important right now. You must, we've talked about, helping people feel safe. So to feel safe, here are the 2 things that are needed. Number 1, being really caring and supportive and compassionate. You've probably heard that word being bandied about. So that's very important because that's calming for our brains. If someone cares about you, your whole threat response kind of calms down. But at the same time, you have to have a very clear focus on performance. And it's a bit like what Mark said before. People are almost asking for more direction, more clarity. And that's it. That's what they want, because for certainty, you need to know what you have to deliver, to what standard, within what time frame, and because that is also quite calming for you. So it's caring, supportive, and compassionate, while at the same time, you need to provide absolute clarity in terms of expectations, deliverables, etc. So you've got to be able to hold both. And that's the challenge of positive leadership. And I will use our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, as a really good example of this, because you would have to say, in a time of crisis, she's extraordinary from a display and compassion point of view and deep care for her country and people. But at the same time, she's been excellent in her communication, crystal clear with all the levels, everything's defined. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why she's been quite successful as a leader during this time. So what I'd like to do now is I'm just going to take you through each of the 4 areas. And this is where I want you to start thinking about each of the areas that I'm talking about. And as we get into this, this is where the crowdsourcing kind of comes into it. I'm going to explain what the area is, and then I'm going to get you to submit your own ideas about what is working well in your organisation at the moment in terms of each of these areas. So I'll let you know when we want to gather those ideas. So Remy, if you can turn to the next slide about fostering a positive climate. Thank you. So what's this about? Right. It is very hard to foster a positive climate when fear is the kind of dominant emotion. And I've talked about the impact of fear, the rigid thinking, the narrow perspective, unable to make connections or see the big picture, hard to be creative or do the higher order thinking. So in order to overcome that, and sorry, there's one other thing as well. At the moment, for many people, just thinking about the brain, a lot of people have a strong negativity bias. Now, it's an evolutionary thing, and it's all about our brains being primed to look for the bad. So bad wins over good. And so for many people right now, it's far easier for them to see what is wrong around them in the world, with their jobs, with their managers, with their organisations, with their families, with their friends, rather than see what is right or the good things. So that negativity, and especially if you're feeding yourself a diet of breaking news all day, you can't help but just see all the bad things because you don't often hear about the good stuff that's happening. But there's a lot of good stuff there. So fostering a positive climate then is all about creating a culture of abundance and looking for possibilities and what might happen. And to do that, you really need to increase the number of positive emotions that people feel every day in virtuous behaviour. So what I mean by that, and you can see some examples of positive emotions here, and it's the stuff that for some of you, you're going to go, oh, God, it sounds really kind of soft and fluffy. But believe me, it isn't. So what we're looking for is a lot of effort going into gratitude, kindness, appreciation, compassion, love, trust, excitement, joy, optimism, hope. All of those things right now are they're the most important things to focus on. Because if you do that, what we know from a research perspective is when you boost positive emotions, it does 2 things. It calms down the threat response, so the whole system calms down, but it broadens your perspective. And it boosts your coping resources as well. So that comes from a woman called Professor Barbara Fredrickson. And she's probably the world expert on the impact of positive emotions. And she's got this theory called broaden and build theory, which is all about boost these, broadens perspective. You're far more flexible and open. And that's what we want right now, people to be able to roll with us and go with us, to support the change and to come up with new ideas. They're only going to do that when there's an abundance of positive emotions and virtuous behaviours in the workplace. Some of the research in this area shows that the top 3 actually in an organisation, gratitude is really number 1. It has the biggest impact. And actually there's a lot of, many of you will be familiar with the research around gratitude. It's very powerful. Number 2 is forgiveness. And so, that whole, what's your culture like around people making mistakes and what happens, have you got a blame culture? Hopefully not. But the third one is around compassion. So those are the top 3 in terms of real business impact. So if you wanted somewhere to start, there'd be 3 good ones to start on. So the next slide is about, well, what are some things you can actually do to foster a positive climate? So all I've done is I've had a look back at all the ideas I've taught over the years, and I've gathered people's feedback, and I've thought about the context that we're operating in right now. And if you're going to be doing anything in terms of fostering a positive climate, I think these would give you quite a big bang for your buck at the moment. Number one is really important, and that is right now there's a whole lot of stuff that's going really, really well, but because of this negativity bias that most of us have, it's really hard to see it. And so that's what I talked about before, catch people doing things right. And what is it? I'll give you an example of the store manager, a retail store manager I was talking about. She would say, if you talk to her now, one of the things that she did that had the biggest impact on her store and turned it around the quickest, because every day she was coming into the store, it was a really challenging environment, everything was going wrong, everyone was telling her about how terrible it was, the results were really poor. And so she had this one opportunity every day, which is called a store walk. Some of you might work in retail or have worked in retail. And on a store walk, the manager goes around and they point out everything that's wrong. And they say, shift that, and that's dirty, move that doesn't look very good. So the one thing that Anna did that really turned the store around was she went looking for what was right. And when she started focusing on the good stuff, so she'd go to each department and say, tell me about the highlights from yesterday. What's working well here? What are you most proud of? What are the best things? What are your best customer service stories? All of a sudden, she found that there was a huge amount going right, but she never had asked about it and no one had ever told her. So go looking for the good in your organisation and find ways to talk about it. And one of the big opportunities you've got is in your meetings. Be very careful about how you start and finish, actually, but in particular start a meeting. Is it all about problems or is it about possibilities and opportunities? Expressing gratitude, getting people to come to the next year, the best things, the highlights, what's going really well, rather than focusing on everything that's. Acts of kindness are incredibly powerful, and it's often just those random acts of kindness that on their own don't seem like much, but they create an incredible kind of reciprocity effect. If I do something kind for you, you'll probably pass it on. And it also boosts your immune system, and it does your well-being a lot of good, as it does the receiver. So there's good reasons to do that. And compassion is incredibly important right now. And compassion is part of it's empathy, so kind of being able to understand what someone else is going through. But that's not empathy on its own isn't compassion. So it's got to be empathy with an action. It's what you do that shows that you care. So I guess if you've got something that's working really well in this area to foster a positive climate, are you able to put that into use the chat button to collect that? We'll collect some ideas. And Mark, if you want to come back and talk about, is there one thing that you're doing that you think is working really well to foster a positive climate at People to People?
Yeah, well, look, I'll mention the Stride nominations again, because I do think that is a very positive. It's everybody else is mentioning what the good that they're seeing in everybody else's behaviour. I suppose when we were chatting about this on the phone the other day, I also thought about authentic. I know that's a word that's used too often these days, but authentic communication, so that I've been basically communicating with everybody in a way that just cuts to the chase, tells them the truth, that everything's. I know this is going to end. This is the third time I've been through a downturn. I know that it's going to end, so it's going to be okay. So I've been very honest and straightforward with people. And in many ways, I suppose sometimes it's almost like letting your guard down a little bit as well, so that people can see that, I'm feeling a little bit of stress as well. It's okay. And I think the example I gave to you, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to be putting it here in front of 100 people or something, about I think we had a end of month meeting, and just to try and razz it up a little bit, we had a karaoke situation. So I ended up singing a song to my business partner, and it was an old Kenny Rogers song, I think, Jane, you might remember, which is She painted up her lips and rolled and curled her tinted hair. That one, the Ruby song. I won't tell you who else singing to. There you go. So, I mean, I think that's, and that hasn't been, I wouldn't say that's been a deliberate strategy, but when you ask me the question, when I think about what has, I think, helped, I think that sort of authenticity and being honest and straight up with people, and then letting your guard down a little bit, it's okay.
Yeah, nice. And I like that example because actually that's quite a vulnerable thing to do. I don't know what your singing's like.
I've done it again. I can't believe it. I'm feeling myself getting a bit red now, Jane, I think.
Yeah. But, you know, that's about being vulnerable. And if you think about how trust forms, then what precedes trust is actually vulnerability, because people think, whoa, okay, that's pretty out there. He's got out there and he can't sing. And they take that as a bit of a cue. Okay, it's okay for him to be vulnerable. Then maybe it's okay for me to be vulnerable too. And I can see over on the right some of the chat that's coming in, and as Julie's asked a question about what can you do when a leader does this, however, then it's the pressure affect them and they explode and then they undo all the hard work that they've done. So, and I think the answer to that would be sometimes you just have to own up and say, oh my goodness, I've stuffed up there. And that's that vulnerability piece. You know, you can say, you know, I'm feeling the pressure and I'm sorry, I didn't mean that to happen. I don't know, sometimes just being open and authentic about that stuff is really good. Just a thought. I don't know if that would work. That's one idea anyway. So in terms of, so that's fostering a positive climate. Hopefully that gives you a feeling for what you need to be doing there, what's working well, gratitude, appreciation, kindness, really boost those as much as you can. So Remy, if you want to flick on to the next one, which is building positive relationships, and you can read this for yourself, but it's really about, you know, the quality of our social connections are just so important. Social connections are, you know, life-giving. They prolong our lives. If you become isolated, disconnected, if you feel like you're rejected or no one cares about you, that does impact the length of your life. And so in the workplace, under the positive leadership model, a lot of it's about how, as a leader, you show up and the energy of your interactions. And Kim Cameron talks about whether you're a positive energizer or a negative energizer. So if I'm talking to Mark and I'm a positive energizer, then he walks away feeling uplifted, enthusiastic and motivated. And if I'm a negative energizer, he kind of walks away feeling like I've just sucked the life out of him. Isn't that great? I've already talked about trust and building deep connections. So you can only build trust through face-to-face contact, really, because that's that oxytocin moment. In that moment, you know, oxytocin is the hormone that is your love or trust hormone, and oxytocin, you have to be present. It's delivered through kind of eye contact and touch. So that's why face-to-face connection is so important. So for a leader, being able to be really visible and walking around, ideally, or in this case now in the virtual world, as long as you can, some interesting research around this, you can still have that oxytocin boost as long as you can see the eyes, because we're reading, kind of hear what people look like, corner of their mouths, you know, and the tone of voice. That's what we're reading to check out whether we're safe. So, Remy, if you just go to the next slide, because it's about, well, what are some of the things that you can actually do to build positive, build positive relationships? Managing your energy and your mood and being a positive energizer is unbelievably important right now, because people are looking for cues from you about whether everything's going to be okay. And it's almost like people's little antenna are up, and they are almost over reading, you know, your expressions and, you know, how you look and what you say and who you're meeting with and what you look like when you're coming out of a meeting, all that sort of thing. They're really trying to get a feel for whether they're safe or not. So how you show up, your energy and your mood will be infecting everybody that you come into contact with. I can't think of a more important time to be able to, for you to show that you care by paying full attention. And gosh, it's hard. You know, this to be able to pay full attention and deeply listen to people without being distracted is one of the hardest things to do, because you know, often we've got our phone sitting there, or you get interrupted by somebody or something, you know, or a notification or something happens. And it's so easy in that moment to just say, oh, just a minute, and you're off over here. Now, in that moment, after you've built all that trust, it just gets destroyed in that moment. So for people to feel like you care, you have to be fully present. And sometimes it's just asking that question, are you okay? And if you go back to that Harvard Business Review research, one of the interesting facts in there was that 40% of the respondents said that their manager hadn't even asked them how they were, which is a bit of a disturbing statistic, I thought. So, you know, sometimes managers are a bit worried that maybe people see that as an intrusion on their privacy, but actually most people want their manager to say, are you okay? So taking the time, talking to your people, asking if they're okay, practice your really deep listening, not getting distracted by things, and being a positive energizer. So if you want to put some ideas into the chat around what's working in this area, and Mark, do you want to talk about, is there one thing you're doing at the moment that you think is working well in terms of building positive relationships?
Yeah, I think I'd like to talk in a bit of a broader sense, and I know this is unique to a recruitment company that has temporary and on-hired staff, I suppose. So rather than the one-to-one sort of communication, but so we have a whole bunch of employees, over 1,000 employees who are on hired out to our clients out there, and we have a direct responsibility to those people. And it's, I know it's not quite the same as your actual employee, but what we decided to do about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and it's been, I think, a very good initiative, is that. And I know it's probably out of context a little bit to what we're talking about here, but we went on to Facebook Live, so that every time somebody put a timesheet in for us, they got a reminder that, yeah, I'm going on to Facebook Live at 12:30 on a Friday afternoon, where we're going to talk about what's happening in the marketplace right now. We're going to talk about opportunities in Australia and New Zealand, job hunting tips, the whole thing. Basically, the whole purpose of that was to give a connection to people who otherwise would only hear from us on the phone once a week, and so that they get a greater sense of, well, we're all in it together, we're all here. And the platform was a modern one with Facebook Live, but I think that did help us a little bit.
Yep, awesome. It's such a good idea, because they feel connected, and it's kind of feeling connected to something bigger. I think that's a really important part of it. Okay. So let's move on to the next one, foster positive communication. So Remy, if you want to flick over to the next slide, that would be great. Now, the communication piece right now is incredibly important, because, and the main thing about it is that, you know, the messages of hope for a better future, you know, kind of come with me, this better future. So hope right now is one of the most important emotions. And so positivity, but it's not being all Pollyanna about things. People want you to be upfront and direct and to say what's actually happening, but saying it in a way that's respectful and appreciative, and treating people with dignity. So Remy, if you just turn to the next slide about, well, what is it that you can do, some of the actions. The first one I've already just touched on, those messages of hope for a better future. The language you're using right now to communicate, people are going to be picking up on hugely, because again, they're looking for cues from you that they are safe. So be careful about the language. Also, and Mark's already talked about this, the shorter communication cycles. I've heard from a lot of people that they feel uncomfortable when they're not being communicated to. And because you get left in a bit of a vacuum, and that's not good. If there's a vacuum around communication, that's when rumours start. So even if you haven't got much to say, it's still better to say something rather than nothing. And the last couple of points there, you still have to give feedback. And if you're not very good, or you shy away from giving people constructive feedback, that's not helpful right now. One of the most important skills or capabilities of a leader is to be able to deliver constructive feedback really well, but in a way that leaves the relationship intact. And so right now, with people working remotely in particular, you know, it is a time to really ramp up the feedback if you can, because that's what people are looking for. They want to know, you know, are they doing the right thing in the right way and delivering what you're expecting? And if not, be upfront with them about, you know, what is expected, because people will appreciate that. So is there one thing at the moment that's working well for you and your organisation? You can put that into the chat. That would be helpful. And Mark, is there something around positive communication that's working well for you at People to People at the moment?
Oh, there we are. I'm back.
We're back.
Well, I think I just reinforce in terms of communication, it is the frequency of it. And I've been very surprised by that. That disconnect between, well, it sounds counterintuitive. I mean, in the recruitment industry and a lot of sales, there's a kickback normally of people saying, I'm being micromanaged all the time. And I think during this crisis, what I've noticed is that people are very keen to have more one-on-one communication, but then having the autonomy then to deliver. I suppose the one question can I flick one back to you? I know it's sort of, it's okay. I was really keen to ask you, and just listening now, about giving positive reinforcement in the moment, and how do you do that in the moment when we are working in this remote sort of environment? Do you have any advice to help us out with that? Because that's, I mean, I've struggled with that. Because all I can see is what I can see like from the system what they're doing, but it feels a little bit Big Brother that I know that, and then suddenly, you know, so I feel like I can't. And even for younger consultants who are new to the industry, who maybe younger is not the right language, but if somebody's new to the industry and they haven't been doing it for very long, coaching them too in the moment, I'm finding really, really challenging. So. I know that I sort of put you on the spot there a little bit, but yeah.
Because normally in the workplace, you see people doing things and you're able to give them feedback straight away, aren't you? Which is the ideal thing, because you want to do it quickly, because then they'll remember it and they'll go, oh yeah. So and you want to catch them doing things right, of course. Comment on the good stuff and do more of that, and give them feedback. So it's finding a way in this kind of virtual environment. Maybe someone's cracked it. I don't know.
The way I worked towards solving it was that I asked everybody to share their successes. And this is a bit hard for Kiwis and for Australians to be shouting at the top of the hill to go, look how good I am. So we don't really like to do that. So I've encouraged everybody to please share your successes. Tell everybody when something good happens, even if it's the smallest thing. So just using these platforms like we have Teams and I think we'll Chatter, etc., that we use. So yeah.
Nice. And Julie's just pointed out, you know, it's an interesting challenge, especially for those who are less likely to share what they're doing well. Some people hate it. That would be the last thing they want to talk about. They'll think it's blowing their own trumpet and they'll hate it. So it's a very individual thing, isn't it? But people are asking for feedback. There may be, you know, there's an opportunity to just sit in, you know, using technology like this while they are delivering feedback. I don't know. Maybe there are more coaching opportunities this way.
Yeah, it is a challenge, definitely. I mean, that's the challenge we've faced between our inexperienced workforce and our experienced workforce. Our experienced workforce are very much, they know what they're doing, so they're craving more communication and more direction, but they like the autonomy that they can deliver that to you with. Whereas it's harder when some of the people who don't have the experience are then left in the lurch a little bit because there's no one to tell them that they're not doing it right.
Maybe buddying up with a more senior person could be a good thing to do right now, and putting more support in place that way, so it's not you doing it, but there's someone else.
The immediate manager, so they don't feel compromised. Yeah.
But a buddy system could be quite good right now. Oh, okay. And then the final area, Remy, if positive meaning. So what's this about? Well, we want to feel that what we do matters. Oh my goodness, why do you get out of bed in the morning and go to work? It's that sense of purpose. You know why you go to work. You know that your work matters. Is telling you and making that connection for you between the organisation and its goals and what you do every day. That's one of the most important things. So if you flick onto the next slide around, well, what are some of the things that you could do to create more positive meaning? Thank you, Remy. Awesome. This is one of the most important things. We've already touched on it. To provide clarity as much as you can right now, to give people certainty. They are craving some certainty, given everything else out there is uncertain. So that vision, purpose, constantly communicating that and making that link, but also the clarity around performance standards, deliverables, responsibilities. You have to be great at delegation. You can't not be in this environment. Providing that stretch opportunity for those who are thriving and want more, and that support and training and trying to get them up to the next level would be really helpful with all that feedback built into it. But one thing right now that's important not to do is, if people are struggling, then don't rescue, unless you really need to, try not to rescue people, because sometimes the struggle is the way to grow. And if you think back over your careers, it's probably when you've struggled the most that you've also grown the most. But you've known there's been someone there in the background kind of who is supporting you, but they're not leaping in to save you. They're putting you in the middle of it. You have to nut it out yourself, and it's hard, and you're it's all just a bit tricky. But if you stick at it and you get through it and you overcome the struggle, then it's that, whoa, I did it. It's really cool. And then you're able to look back and say, wow, look how far I've come. So try not to rescue people. Help them see that this is an opportunity for growth, and then see what they can do. So it's that whole opportunity to really develop your talent. So what is it that you're doing right now? Is there anything that's working well in your workplace around creating positive meaning? And Mark, is there one small thing that you think is working quite well with people to people at the moment in this area?
Yeah, well, this is I really, when you asked me this before, I sort of latched onto the whole point of meaningful work. I mean, as you can imagine, in the environment that we're in now, the number of vacancies that we're working on at the moment have declined significantly. So consultants are sitting there going, well, okay, well, I'm not working on as many vacancies. How do I provide value to my clients? So we did stuff like this leadership series on webinars, but also we've been doing quite a bit of work on surveys as well, and providing information back to our clients. I mean, there's a specific request from clients to us to go to market to find some information. In Australia, we've just done a SNAP survey, and we've set up just over 300 meetings, like one-to-one meetings, to describe the feedback from that survey. And so from the consultant's point of view, they've got tools that they can use, they've got reasons that they can speak to their clients, and what they're doing is they're giving something back to their customers. So there's meaning in, so, okay, well, we've done this, and this is what we've found out for you. We want to share that with you. Now, it may not be financially rewarding immediately, but it certainly assists our consultants in providing some meaning to their work, which in the long run provides value to their customers and to us.
Yeah, and I think you do have to take the long view here, the long-term perspective, because you're probably not going to get the payback immediately, but it will come. I like the point around giving back. It is meaningful. It's one of the best things that you can do to create meaningful people. I like Jamie's just put in a point there about creating positive meaning about when you embrace the struggle. That's quite a good thing to do as well. I like that. So those are the 4 areas of positive leadership. So, you need to ideally be doing some work in each of those areas. Would be a really powerful thing to do right now. And then I'll come on to the very final thing before we come on to the questions part. It would be ideal if you had a solid foundation in place first. Now, it's important, but it's not critical. So don't worry if these things aren't in place. It doesn't mean that you can't apply the practices of positive leadership. But if you do have these things in place, then it will help hugely. So number 1 is having a solid foundation. The first one is a foundation of psychological safety. And we've already touched on this, a foundation of trust that is already there. and a willingness to be vulnerable. If you've already got that in your team, then you're already ahead of the game. And I really like this question, and it's one that I think you probably need to think about quite carefully around, do your people feel included, safe to learn, safe to contribute and challenge without fear of being embarrassed, marginalised or punished? So I think that's probably quite a good question for you to reflect on, and you might have some work to do on that. Don't know, just food for thought. Secondly, if you have personally well-established practices around looking after your own well-being, it's kind of like having your own oxygen mask on first. If you're in a good place yourself, so you have good practices around exercise, sleep, you're eating well, you're getting all the relaxation you need, you're staying connected to others, then that means that you're going to be calm, you're going to be strong, you're going to be resilient, you're going to be composed under pressure, and you can be quite flexible. So if you stay calm, then others will stay calm too. Remember, you infect everybody that you come into contact with. So that's the ideal foundation. Don't worry too much if they're not in place. You can still do those other things, but work towards these if you can. So finally, if you go to the last slide, very last piece. So what's the most important right now? Helping your people find a way out of that survival mode and into safe mode, because that's really the only way that you're going to be getting them able to, really perform and do what you need them to do. And I just put a couple of questions. Maybe you could ask yourself something like, what can I do to help people feel safe today? And then reflect on that at the end of the day. What did I do to help people feel safe today? Could be useful reflection questions if you're that type of person, maybe not, I don't know. So from here, I hope there's been something in there for you. And is there a tiny action that you might take as a result of what we've covered today? Is there anything, Mark, that you can think of that you might do as a result of this?
I think a little more positive reinforcement, I think, is the one thing that I should definitely do. Acknowledgement of those around me. Yeah. I'm always a little bit slack on that, I know for sure.
Yeah, catch them doing good stuff and comment on it.
Yes, that's right. Now we do have a question here. I'm just conscious of time because we've got three minutes left. And our question here is, in a sales environment, how do you achieve that balance between creating a culture of abundance, i.e. positivity, about possibilities, without setting unrealistic expectations?
Goodness, that's a hard one, isn't it? I don't know if I know the answer to that. Do you know from being in a sales environment?
I think it's all, if I was to give any advice, it would be about the setting of the understanding what those expectations are and constantly measuring against them. Yeah.
Right.
And in this environment, what we've found is that you need the measures are very short term. So
right now.
Yeah. So rather than longer term, you have to. It's almost a little bit silly to be trying to forecast 6 months out from now when none of us have any sort of idea. So in a sales environment, we tend to have what we've done is adjusted to be more almost daily, weekly, measurable goals. So and then feeling good about yourself once you meet those little measurable goals every day.
Well, that's a little dopamine hit that we all want, isn't it? That little reward. But Alison's put in, goals should be realistic and achievable. Probably right now, that's probably a really good thing. Daily goals, short-term measures, so that we start to feel like we're achieving. That's one of the most important things right now, that people need to feel like, they're being successful. That's one of the best things that we can possibly do. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, I am conscious of time. It is now right on the hour, I think, since we joined the webinar. So I want to say, Jane, thank you so much for sharing your insights today, all the way from Christchurch. So, thanks again. It's been fabulous. Obviously, we'll be sharing the presentation afterwards. If you have any questions, you can always direct them directly to Jane at the Flourishing Institute and her website. That will pass those details on as well. So really valuable insights. Thanks again, Jane, and thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and good luck, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Ta.